with everyone's permission, because some people cannot attend and have asked me to record this. We're recording the presentation. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for coming. Please start your presentation.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll start then first with an introduction of who so I'm with a nonprofit group. I'm not with your city or your county. I'm with a nonprofit group that's called Diablo FireSafe Council. I'm their executive coordinator. We've been incorporated since October of 1999, so we've had more than 20 years that we've been working. We work across 2 counties, Alameda and Contra Costa. So I have 37 different jurisdictions, meaning cities, that are in the very high fire hazard severity zone. So if you haven't heard of us, then it just may be that until this year, wildfire wasn't on your radar. I am by training a registered landscape architect, and I have a specialty in wildfire prevention. And that started after the 1991 tunnel fire because the president of our firm lost his home. So I've been working as a planner and facilitator since that 1991 fire. I've been involved in regional and local plans, worked with agencies, fire departments, and homeowners. And I'm really pleased to bring you this brand new program that we're developing right now. And I'll tell you a little bit about it in a minute. So our game plan is I'm going to move pretty quickly, and you're probably going to miss some stuff, but that's okay. You're going to be able to see it on recording, and I'm going to give you other resources that you can go to. So I'm going to start with this introduction to a program called Good to Go that we're developing. Then I'm going to give a little reminder about wildfire behavior. It's the Wildfire Behavior 101, and it really talks to you about why do you need to be ready to evacuate. And then we'll talk a little bit about that only you can evacuate and what the roles and responsibilities are during evacuation. And then I'm going to give you 4 potential evacuation triggers. And that's the new piece of the program, is these using an evacuation trigger as a call for action that each of you need to take when you reach these different trigger points. What are they, how you to know about them, and what you need to do. And then I'm going to wrap up with a challenge to action to find out if you guys are interested in working with us to refine this just-in-time program, because that's what the program is called. So since February of this year, I've been working with a leadership team in the community of Sunol, which is in Alameda County. And we've been working with the Alameda County Fire Department and the Santa Clara unit of CAL FIRE. If you don't know what SCU means, they are your CAL FIRE unit. They cover Richmond area as well as all the way down. They cover 5 counties. So they're important to know. So funding came from a grant that we got from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection as part of the California Climate Investments Program. So again, they're recognizing there's climate change going on, and we were able to get some funding for this program. There is a website for the program. It's called goodtogowildfire.com with a WW in front. And we're really hopeful that you guys will be interested in continuing to give us input and as we expand the program and take it forward to other communities. So right now, the Good to Go program has 5 modules, and you get to pick and choose what is most helpful for you. We're covering 23 topics, and we have 39 different checklists in our workbook. And it's divided into the first module is called Getting Ready to Go. You're going to see little pieces of things that I've cherry picked out of this, but that's going to tell you how to know when to go. Then the second module talks about Set to Go. So it gets you ready so you know what to take when you go. The third one is the Way to Go. I know a lot of people are concerned about how do they know which way they're going to go. It's more complicated than you can think. We can't just tell you one way. Everyone Goes has to do with evacuating pets and large animals. In Sunol, they actually have backyard chickens to llamas to cattle to all sorts of stuff. So we have not only our dogs and cats and hamsters and guinea pigs, but also large animals. And then the last module is called Going Home, and that's tips for returning after a wildfire evacuation. So tonight we're talking about the just-in-time. So if you didn't get to have time you didn't know about those modules, they weren't available to you, we're trying to develop a program that's going to be maybe about 20 minutes that you can learn about how do you prepare when you haven't prepared yet, and now it's time to go. And so the idea is that we're using this evacuation process in 4 different moments in time that should trigger you to act, and of course then telling you what to do. We're also going to talk briefly about what to expect and what to do if things go wrong. There's a lot of stuff in the modules about what do you do. You know, we've tried to think of all the questions you might have of things that could go wrong. And then the returning home, getting ready for next time is another chance of you to learn more and have it really resonate with you. I do want to remind you that if you live in Richmond or El Sobrante, that you actually do have quite a few guides that you may not realize that there are wildfire preparedness and evacuation guides for the county and for the city. They're somewhat similar, you'll see, but they're also a little different because they're different jurisdictions. So if you got to answer, some people had no idea about their fire department. The best thing about this is the fire agencies work through the incident command system. So if there is a fire, the first one that arrives on the scene is the incident commander until someone higher ranking comes. They do what's called mutual aid. So it almost doesn't matter who your fire department is, except for me, because I need to make sure my program works with each different chief's programs. But basically, if there's an incident that happens, you get everyone. Hopefully you don't have to have everyone in the state, but they all know how to work together, and it's through this incident command system. If you don't know anything about the incident command system, you can go learn about it on a FEMO. You can take a program and get certified to understand about the incident command system. So anyway, you've got a lot of information that's out there available to you if you're interested. But now we're going to move on. I'm going to do this quickly because I don't want to get bogged down into talking some more about the basics of wildfire. So we know that fire is a natural part. We chose to live in California. We've got climate and weather patterns that are supporting frequent fire. We are seeing more climate change, bigger fires, mega fires. We've got native plants that are fire dependent, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about all this other fuel besides our native plants. We know we live in a very high fire severity zone up in your 94803. The state did these maps long time ago. They've been due for updates. If you zoom in on your area, you can start to see where Highway 80 is. You can see the reservoir. You're right there in that big red area, or you probably wouldn't be on the call tonight. When we worked with the city of Richmond to update their community, or sorry, to expand their community wildfire protection plan, that's a CWPP, we took the county's plan and we helped Richmond do one customized to themselves. They've included even more areas in their very high fire hazard severity zones. You can see that Point Melotti and Point Richmond and Point Panola have been added. And there's a little bit of addition in the hills area. And basically the areas that are in the lighter pink, which aren't of course showing on the Richmond map, are the things that are out in regional park and ebb mudlands. And those are recognized by both of those agencies as very high fire hazard severity areas. So if you're concerned about the fact that there's been fires burning and you're worried about evacuating, you've had the smoke and ash, that's what this presentation is about. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what you need to know and what you need to be able to do. So I'm going to run through the Wildfire Behavior 101, just to remind you, you probably know more about fire than you realize. If you think back to how you get a campfire how you get a campfire lit, you need the heat. That's your ignition, your match. You need the fuel. That's your little stack of wood. And you need obviously oxygen. So we can't do much about the heat or oxygen, but we can control the fuels. And the fuels is what I want you to pay attention to as you start thinking about how vulnerable is my house and neighborhood. So once a fire is going, the wildfire behavior is determined by the weather. That's why we're so nervous on certain days. We're going to talk a lot about red flag days. If you don't know that term yet, when you leave today, you are going to know about red flag days. We're concerned about the topography. We're going to talk a little bit more about why does topography matter. You guys are up on the hill. I think most of you are up on the hill. And so you've got some topography around that can make fire behavior harder for them to deal with. And you've got fuel. Don't think fuel is just vegetation. Your homes, you're going to see in a minute, are really combustible material, and the structures are just as important, add as much to a fire. If you saw that first picture of Coffee Park in the beginning of my presentation, you'll notice that the homes are what burned and not the vegetation. The vegetation was green by the time that fire moved through it. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So hopefully most of you, understand that we have a really dry season all summer long. It's called a Mediterranean climate. There are 7 places around the world that have this kind of climate, and those of us that are blessed with this also are cursed by fire weather. And so for us, we call them Diablo winds. They come off of around Mount Diablo. They come from the north and the east. These winds are really dry, and they bring really low relative humidity, and often they bring high temperatures, but not always. And you can have a wind-driven fire with low humidity and not have high temperature, and it still be really hard to deal with. Because what's happening with the weather is the winds are pushing the flames faster, they're drying the fuels more, they're pushing the fire down the hill, they're causing all sorts of rapid change of direction as they come into the canyons. And so the weather is really important. You're going to see more about the National Weather Service, and I also will call it NOAA, which is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency, and they're the leader agency above National Weather Service, and they're who you need to know about to find out about the red flag. We're going to talk about, you saw this little red flag down at the bottom. I'm pointing, but you probably can't see my pointing, but you see it there on the screen. Actually, I think I can do this. So you're going to see these red flags throughout tonight's program. I mentioned about the topography. The greater the slope, the more intense the fire. You can sort of envision from this little cartoon about what's happening as the flames are going uphill. This is why fire moves so fast uphill. If it's in a saddle or a chute, it can be pushing heat back and forth across the canyon and drying everything out. So you really need to worry when you're up on top of canyons, etc. And so you need to be prepared. So normally when I do this presentation, if I'm in person, I bring a bunch of little props because I bet most of you have at some point in time either watched a campfire be built or have can imagine how it would do. And if you're in the technical world of wildfire prevention, you understand what the fuel classes are. I don't care if you understand the fuel classes. I want you to think about that first you have very small things, pine needles or lattice material. That's what can ignite more easily. Then you have a little bit bigger, that's 1 hour, which means if it had rained and then the sun came out, it only takes an hour to get that material, so it could be flammable. You still need the ignition source. The 10 hour, I think of it as the size of my little finger, and it means that it takes, if it's been rainy and everything's been wet, it could be these little pickets or a shrub, it takes about 10 hours of sunshine to really dry it out to make it ready. Normally, you know, in 10 hours, we get a little bit of fog in, or, you know, so it's only on those really dry days that we worry. But this is how the fire needs the small stuff, then the bigger stuff. And it will not light these really big materials. Usually I think of those as up to the size of my wrist. You can't just light these from a regular ignition source. You need to have the smaller materials. So when we ask you to prune things and get dead materials out, that we're asking you to remove these smaller materials so that a larger material pile has a much harder time igniting. When you get to the 1,000 hours, that's taking days to change to get it ready. And you cannot ignite your big parts of your home just from a little spark. We're going to talk a little bit more about how is your home vulnerable. But I want you to remember and keep in mind as you're thinking about where am I most vulnerable, what sorts of things should I do. I'm not worried about a big dead standing tree. If the lower limbs are off and it's just these standing pieces that may be dead, you still can't get it ignited. I could stand it with a blowtorch and it probably wouldn't ignite. So I really want you to think about the things we can do are the stuff with the smaller materials, and they really make a difference. We can even get rid of stuff that's as big as my wrist if we need to. So got to move on, not going to really talk about defensible space, but I wanted you to start remembering about this as you're thinking about evacuation. There are 3 different ways a wildfire spreads, and I do want you to be very cognizant of these because they will make a difference. So for instance, direct flame impingement, you guys are probably all familiar. That's when a fire comes across the landscape and starts to engulf other things. So if you saw direct flames coming near you, don't wait for anyone to tell you. You're going to want to evacuate. And the likelihood of this happening is probably pretty small. This is what's more likely to happen. Is that there's something, a house fire, a car fire, you know, it doesn't even have to be a wildfire, and something starts putting embers and firebrands up into the air. So these come raining down like a snow blizzard, and they can start more fires. If you're evacuating in this, you're going to hear later about how to dress for survival when you evacuate. This is the reason why. All these things can get in your eyes, get on your skin, etc. And they can, of course, start other fires. So, you know, we're going to talk briefly about your home too. And then the last one, which is why Coffee Park looks so strange. This is the 3rd mechanism that's happening to spread fire, and it's strictly radiant heat. It's the idea that one house gets so hot that the other house materials inside start igniting. Now, in this case, this new home might have had flammable materials in it, but certainly in Coffee Park, you know, it just goes house to house to house. The vegetation is not involved at all. So that's the 3rd piece. And again, I want you to just remember this. This is the big reason why we ask for evacuation, is that we do not want you to try to stay and protect your home, because there may be so much heat that comes through your community that you need to be able to get out when you're ordered to, so that you're not involved in this type of house-to-house exposure. So the last little piece before we leave this and move more to evacuation is the idea that I want you to understand how your home is vulnerable. Because fire can enter in a variety of ways, and usually these are coming in by the embers. So when you first look at this house, it looks like, wow, you know, stucco house, tile roof, etc. But if you have that kind of home, you want to check the edges and see, are they protected, or could embers get in? And that's how this house got on fire, was could embers get in underneath your unprotected edges? Could they come in through vents or openings, or are they screened? Could they land on wood decks or doors? Now there's information in both the CWPP, and you have some in your Richmond guide, and I don't think it's in the Contra Costa guide, but it's in the Contra Costa CWPP about how do you go about fixing these things. It's called home hardening, and there's lots of links and lots of good information on what would you do if you want to harden your home. Don't know how many of you have dual pane windows, but if you've recently redone your windows and they're vinyl, or they have vinyl components, that can melt. And so you may have a very pretty double pane window for energy, but it may be vinyl. You know, just check with whoever's installing your windows or has installed. Because what happens is once the outer pane breaks, this is just from heat coming through the area. And then the inner pane, if it breaks, then all the embers can get in and light your house on fire when it would have survived otherwise. The last one is at the bottom of your exterior walls. You can see that little embers came in and started up the wall. The inside the wall fires are really the hardest to deal with, because typically they happen many hours after the firefighters think, oh, everything looks good. And they've gone on, and then there's nobody around, and the fire starts inside the wall and burns out. So that's the little piece on wildfire. And I want to just remind you again that the reason we've talked about it is so that you really understand that when you get these orders, ultimately it goes from a red flag warning to a red flag alert to an evacuation warning to evacuation order. And sometimes you don't hear any of them. Sometimes you don't even get the evacuation order. And I'm going to try to get you cued in to understanding when do you feel like you need to leave, even if you haven't heard an order. So first I want to talk a little bit about what the different roles are. So I mentioned that there's a whole procedure called the incident command system. So when there's a fire in your area, somebody will be the incident commander. It may start by a fire captain who just happens to notice it, but then a battalion chief will come in, and then maybe a more senior commander, and then ultimately you might get an incident management team like they did in Sunol. So there is the fire part of the fire. And then the fire part of the fire, the incident commander is going to tell your law enforcement. So your messaging should come in through your county sheriff or your police department. If you should have a firefighter knocking on your door, you know that things kind of went south, because the fire guys should be out working the fire line, and they only come and start doing evacuation when everything gets out of control and they really need to move people out. And you have some really important roles and responsibilities. You have to be ready to receive the alerts. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you make sure you sign up for them. And you need to be ready to act on all these different levels, and you need to be prepared. So one of the most interesting things as I've started researching this program and went out to look at all the researchers is a piece of research that's called Should I Stay or Should I Go Now or Should I Wait and See? And this was a sociologist that specializes in wildfire that's out of the U.S. Forest Service. Her name is Sarah McCaffrey. She's a wonderful lady. You can just type her questions, or I can type her questions and get her to give me feedback. And they found that there are 3 different types of people. And I want you to think about, as I say this, what sort of person do you think you'll be should you be asked to evacuate? Are you the person that's going to be ready to go? And that's if it's me, I'm already gone because I've had to evacuate before. So in my mind, I know I am getting out as soon as I hear a warning or whatever. And then there's a group of people that won't go at all. They either have animals they have to take care of, or they have a person that they have to take care of that they're worried about moving. You know, they may be someone who needs oxygen support or something like that, but they just aren't going to go no matter what. And that's very dangerous in a wildfire, because often once the flames are there, they want to go. And that's when you really shouldn't, because that's when most of the deaths or incidents in wildfire happen from really late evacuations. And then there's the middle group, and that's the biggest group. And that may be where you are tonight, that you're in that should I wait and see? How do I really know? You know, I've got a lot of things I still need to do, that barriers to it. And so I'm hoping that this program, and the Sunol group agreed that this program will help us move more of us into that we're going to be ready. We don't need to wait and see. We have our triggers set, we know, and once we match that trigger, we are going to move. And that's the idea, is to be ready to act. So now I'm going to go through each of these little steps. So you may still be a little confused about, well, how do I know about the red flag? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But should you hear about the red flag warning, there are a series of things that you really need to do. And the first is to get ready for the next level. So the warning is the very first level. They usually give it 72 hours before a red flag alert. If you're familiar to listening to the weathermen or hearing about red flag warnings, and I'm going to tell you where you can go to actually look for them, 72 hours, 3 days before, they'll be saying, oh, we think there may be a red flag conditions coming up. Sometimes you'll hear them in different ways, a red flag advisory, but the idea is that they're worried that they're going to get this change in the weather, and that should an ignition happen, that fire could get out of control. And to me, that's the very first step. It's not telling you you have to leave yet. It's just telling you you need to monitor the sources, what the fire department calls situational awareness. So beware, start stepping outside and smelling, is there any smoke? But you don't need to be panicked yet. You do need to review what you're going to do on a red flag alert. And then you kind of can think about, well, what else might I want to do? So once you're ready for that, like for me, I always fill the car with gas, because I've done some evacuations that were supposed to be 3 hours and they took 13. And we had to stop for gas, and starting with a full tank of gas is just something I like to do. And we have these lists of if time allows, and actually there is a checklist in your guide already about things to be able to do around your home to reduce the chance of ignition. And if you've got time, you've got potentially 72 hours. Certainly you want to make sure that you're careful and that you don't use a power tool or barbecue or any heat or spark source if you're starting to get red flag conditions. And we're going to talk a little more about what does that mean. So this is the first thing I want to ask in your chat. If any of you are signed up for any notifications, you have in your guide all the different ways that you can register. In both guides, they look a little different, but they're sending you to the same place. So if you're registered for anything, I'd like you to type in the chat, either CWS or Nixle or PG&E, or if you're on the NOAA site, or if you have any other way that you're signed up to receive notifications. I just want to see what you folks use. And then this list is the list that are recommended for you. That the CWS is the community warning system, and you want to be registered for alert, but don't do just that, because sometimes that doesn't completely work. It usually does, but doesn't. You always want a couple of different ways. You can sign up for Nixle really easily right this instant. Pull your smartphone out and text your zip code 94803 to 88777. Nothing else. You just type in, I want to send this to 888777, and you type in 94803, and you can do it again and again with other zip codes. If you have a great friend that lives over in Rossmore, or you have someone that lives up in Sacramento, it's basically registering you for that Nixle in that place. And then you'll get text messages of whatever they have going on in Nixle. I won't cover the other ones. Of safe and well is if you're evacuating, you want to be able to say and register that you're safe and well, and that the PSPS is the public safety, you get information. The PG&E has to give you tries to give you 72 hours again before they shut down. And often they're telling you they're going to shut down because of the winds. And that's the sign that there's red flag coming. So you're going to, for situational awareness, you're going to be more aware of the weather. The red flag comes up when a fire is going to be difficult to control. It comes up when it's windy, when it's dry, and when it's hot, when they're seeing that the winds have shifted and they're coming in from Mount Diablo. And so they're coming across the drier part of Nevada. There's a piece in our module for Sunol that will be relevant for you guys too, about what does that mean? What does that Diablo wind look like? Why are we under red flag? So I talked about texting your zip code, and here's the HTTP, the www for NOAA about the fire weather. So you can read just like the firefighters do 3 days in advance when there's a time that's concerned. Nobody has to tell you. You can go and check what's going on with the fire weather. You can also monitor active fires. So the CAL FIRE, there's another www you'll get once you look at the recording. You can see, are there fires anywhere in the area that I should be concerned about? So that these are not the ones as soon as they're lit. These are a CAL FIRE incident, so they're growing a little bigger, but you'll know if there's something out in Readiness that you should be worried about, or something up towards the Delta that you should be worried about. And then the other place you can get it is weather radios. If you have a weather radio, you can leave it set and it will come on and sort of squawk at you when there's some news that you need to know about on the weather radio. So now we've done the first trigger, which was that when you hear there's a warning, and you may only hear it if you go searching for it. You may not hear it at all. The first thing you hear might be a red flag alert. And usually the media will, if you watch the weathers or you have the radio on, they will come on and talk about a red flag alert. I almost always hear about these on my local radio news station about a red flag alert. And I'm going to give you some radio stations that you should be listening to. If the back of your hair stares up and I've got blinds that rattle in my house, I know I can go check and see if KCBS has got anything going. I usually go right to the NOAA website. But anyway, so when you hear a red flag alert, again, you don't have to leave yet. The idea is not to go yet. The idea is just to tell you that should something ignite near you, that it might be a call for evacuation. So the thing you're really doing is being ready to leave on a short notice. You're going to want to continue to monitor the information sources. For us, I'm saying you better confirm your family communication plan, because if you have to evacuate, it's really easy to get split up. My last evacuation was before cell phones, and it was pretty nerve-rattling to not have a way to really easily communicate. You want to review your go bag. If you don't have a go bag yet, we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. I start preloading my car. When a red flag alert comes up, my cat box comes up so that she gets used to seeing it more often. And I preload my car with a little small litter box and litter and some cat, your list is going to be different. So we have, and you'll see it in a minute, a gotta go checklist so you can prioritize. Then we're going to want you on the red flag alert to make sure you have everything ready to put on during Dress for Survival. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then you're going to want to review the steps on your evacuation order checklist. So you can see this stuff. You're not doing anything besides just making sure everything is ready. You're making sure your phone is ready, that you're receiving messages, that you remain alert, and you monitor all this stuff. But you're going about your life, basically. But you're aware, you're watching for if there's any fires. So we also want to make sure you understand what these different terms are. And in your guides, and you can download this off of any of the websites if you don't have them, and Soheila and I can make sure you have the links. They look like these two things, the Richmond Guide. Oops, sorry. The Richmond Guide was mailed to everyone, and I think the Contra Costa one was mailed too, but you can pull them off the websites. So this is that fire weather watch. It looks a little bit different than the red flag advisory. It's the same thing. It's just warning you that there might be weather in trouble. The red flag warning, some of the fire departments in the region fly a red flag, but it doesn't matter. That warning is still out on the news, and you can go find it for yourself. The evacuation warning, we're going to talk about in a minute, and the order and the difference between them. But you're basically using these four things to get you ready to, if the evacuation order goes, you leave. I leave on the warning, but we want you all to leave if there's an order. And then there are also information in the book about shelter in place and safety zones and rescue and recovery. So a lot of people ask me, when do I need to evacuate? And my easy answer is leave immediately if you're told. But it's also okay to evacuate early. You do not have to be ordered to evacuate. And in fact, if you started saying, should I evacuate? You probably already should have. I mean, if you really seriously, if you're listening to me tonight and saying, should I evacuate? Then, no, not yet. And it's just a reminder that the fire incident commander, so your fire department, issues an evacuation order through the Richmond Police Department and the Contra Costa Sheriff's Office. So that's who you should be hearing it through. Sometimes there'll be a deputy that drives around. Sometimes there'll be someone from the police that drives around with megaphones. Sometimes there's no time for knocking on doors. You need to take the initiative and to stay informed. And if you've got neighbors or friends that have issues with being able to stay informed, you need to help them too. We'll talk about that in a minute too. So now it's becoming, there's really a red flag alert. You've either, You've either seen the red flag or you've heard it, that there's an evacuation warning. And they usually will not do warnings unless they can give you a couple of hours. They will usually go right to an order. But sometimes evacuation warnings can go on for days. So with the Sunol community, they had to evacuate, part of that community had to evacuate this year. And they got a warning the evening before, and I think it was late afternoon when they finally had to go out. And then they were able to come back in, and the next time they had no warning. It went right to an order. So you have to understand that you may not have heard about the red flag watch or the red flag advisory or the evacuation warning, but you need to be ready for all of them. And again, you're going to be in this stage, you're still monitoring sources, but you're getting more ready. And you need to review what you're going to do if there is an evacuation order. And if there wasn't a red flag warning, you really should look back onto those lists. So you make sure that you've done all the things that you decided you needed to do. Because at this point with the warning, you're preloading your car, you're parking it to face the street, you're making sure you can open the garage door even if there's no power, because sometimes the power goes off right when there's a warning. If you have garages, if you don't have a garage, then you're probably set. And that you are ready once there's an evacuation order. And again, if you've got time, you can go about the rest of your life. There's a little checklist about if time allows, so you can reduce the chance of ignitions around your home. The more you can do, the better you are, but you should always take a warning and order as your first priorities. When a warning comes up, you need to now be ready to go. Not thinking about, oh, I wanted to put a ladder up to the roof. Forget it. You need to be ready to go. Once you're ready to go, then you can start thinking about what else. So 3 easy steps if you get a warning is you want to review your go bag and your checklist. And you're going to have those available to you as a quick list or as a bigger list if you haven't done it yet. You're going to, if there's a warning, you're going to think about, well, maybe I should put on the clothes, but at least you're going to have the dress for survival stuff right around. And the most important thing, you're going to not only just be open to listening, you're going to go search for information sources. You're going to talk to your neighbors and friends. You're going to say, have you heard anything more? Because sometimes that's how the evacuation order gets spread more easily. Is through the fact that people are really searching for stuff. So real simple, if there's an immediate evacuation, meaning, you don't have time, you're thinking of you and any of your pets that you really want to have take them. Your papers should already be preloaded in the cloud, but make sure you go out with your driver's license because you need that to come back in. And if you've got prescriptions or if you've got any critical papers that you think you might need, you may be allowed back into your home in an hour. You may be allowed back into your home in weeks. You may be allowed back into your home in a couple of days and then be sent out again. It all depends on what happens with the fire. So you leave as though, my very first evacuation, we had to leave as though we were never going to come back. And we were only allowed 1 suitcase each. That was from a war zone. So you really think carefully way before time about your pictures and your computer, and the plastic and cash are really important because make sure you have cash in small denominations, or unless your toilet paper is going to cost $20 if you can get the cash out of an ATM. So little things like that are tips for that. If you grab a workbook off of the Good to Go Sunol, the workbook for module 2 has these no time must go checklists, and they're good for everywhere. And in this checklist, we ask you to think about your top 10 things, and we want them to number them and use that system. So to me, as soon as a red flag comes up, I pull my list and I've got it pre-numbered. And then I look at it again and say, did I want to change that numbering? And I have a bunch of notes written on it of things I want to get done. And I actually tape it to the back of inside of my door, because I know that even though I teach this stuff and do this stuff, that should I have to evacuate, my brain's going to go. And I better have some lists to help me. These are my cheat sheets that I keep going. So if you got lots of time, like now, you can build a bigger go bag. I have a little one in my car, and then my bigger one is actually my suitcase, and it starts getting built. This idea of a little backpack doesn't make it for me, but there's a list about it. You're basically thinking about 3 days of being away. When you're building these, you can build for whatever. I mean, my car is my go bag as far as I'm concerned. But take this, realistically about what would you need and build your list. But most important is do something. If this is too much, just do the gotta go. Here's our dress for Soheila. Yes. Oops, I'm sorry. You're going to get to hear me talk beforehand. Get out, and you've got to protect for embers and heat. Start from your head. So get a wide brim or a hard hat. You're trying to protect the members going down the back of your neck. You're going to want goggles, because, man, if you get an ember in your eye, you're never going to be able to drive out. You're going to want a respirator if you can get an N95. Again, you're going to want to keep protecting your airway. This will not protect your airway from heat, but it will protect your lungs.
Cheryl, we hardly can hear it.
Sorry, I'm sorry. So I'm not quite sure how to get rid of it. So you saw the picture. Oh, maybe it won't do it when I go backwards. Okay, good. So the idea is that you're protecting yourself from those embers. Remember, I talked about the embers and how they play a critical role, and they happen from all sorts of stuff. They're basically materials that haven't completely burned. And so when a wildfire starts going around you, you will have these flying embers, and you want to start from your head with a wide brim hat. It doesn't really matter what it is, but even a ball cap is better than nothing. Hard hat works, but you know, a leather cap is best, and you're going to want full coverage goggles. If the embers are swirling and they get into your eye, you cannot see to drive or to get into your car. If you have any of the N95 respirators, you're going to want one of those, because that's what really will block the small particles as you move from your car, or you know, whatever. This is really important. When you dress, you want to dress like this crazy Australian, with a long sleeve shirt and heavy pants, even if it's hot. And you're going to want to make sure that they are natural fibers, no Under Armour, no polyester. You're going to want to have something that is cotton or wool. And even though you think, oh my gosh, that's going to be so hot, if you're ever out in that stinging embers, you'll be so glad to have these natural fibers, because they will not burn, and they will not burn into your skin, which can happen from the polyester t-shirts. The patterns can burn into your skin. You'll want leather work gloves and sturdy leather boots and woolen and cotton socks. And you may say, why do I want those? But if you ever had to move anything or touch anything, the better your work gloves and the less damage you can do. You know, being able to just move something out of the way and then go on your way is really important. So this is something that we've not really talked about before. As I said, it came from Australia, but more and more people are starting to realize how important it is that you not go out in a t-shirt or flip-flops or just whatever you happen to be wearing, but really think about, how am I gonna dress and get out and survive? And you may be in these clothes for a couple of days, so make sure that they are comfortable. Hopefully you've packed a change of clothing in your go bag, but you know, you may be a while before you can change. So again, when we're in this red flag piece, we want you to keep monitoring the weather. Here are the local radio stations. This is the Sunol slide, so that's why you see AC alert. But KCBS and KGO and KNBR are the news stations that pick up this information and are sent this information out from the public information officers. So listen to those radio stations. Pick whichever one you like, but go to those news stations and put them on your radio in your car and at home as you're waiting to see, are we going to go from warning to alert? Sorry, to order. So now the evacuation warning maybe was in place only 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you've got an order. And what does that evacuation order mean? It means leave now. And if you hear a warning and you can't remember, do I have to leave yet or not? Then leave now. This is only going to go up and out over the CWS when they are worried about your life. It will come to very specific zip codes, and in some areas they can even do smaller than a zip code. They can frame it by streets. So when we had evacuation orders in Sunol, they framed it by a lot of the major streets. I would imagine they would do the same, because they're trying to get people to move out in an orderly way, and they're optimizing the traffic flows. So that's the evacuation order. So what do? You take your car. Do not try to hike out. And the reason that you take your car, and you want to take your most capable car, if you've got a choice between a sedan and a sports car, take the sedan. If you've got a choice between a sedan and an SUV, take the SUV, as long as it has more gas. You're going to want to pick up neighbors. Have a conversation with your neighbors or anyone that you care about. You're going to see in a minute that might need some extra help. Recently heard a story from the campfire of a husband and wife that had already arranged that with their elderly neighbor, that she wanted to go and her husband wasn't going to. And so have those arrangements. Once you get going, turn on the headlights. Remember to do your seat belts. You're going to want to turn on your inside air to recirculate. And if you've got air conditioning, you want to put your air conditioning on too. You're going to want to tune to those local radio stations I just gave you. And you're going to want to drive out slowly and calmly. You're not going to stop to ask for law enforcement or firefighters for information. If you see any and they wave you a certain direction, you're going to go which way they tell you. And you're most importantly not going to pass cars. The visibility will be low. You've all experienced it recently of what happens at noon when we didn't even have a fire in our area. We just had smoke. But that horrible darkness and weird glowing is what you have to be ready for. So you are going to take your car. Where are you going to go? You may be told to go to a temporary refuge or an assembly area. This information will come when the order is released. And the reason that happens, there are pre-designated facilities, but we cannot send you to a facility unless we're sure it's safe and it's far enough away from the fire to really be an effective center. So these evacuation centers are all over the 2 counties, all over the state. You may also be told to go to a temporary refuge, and that may not be a building, especially nowadays with the COVID. It could be an open area, it could be a golf course, it could be a parking lot, it could be a commercial building. When you get there, you're going to park with your windows up, and you want to be as far from any vegetation or structure. And if the worst goes worst, you're going to sit there and wait for the fire to pass. And it's going to be pretty scary, but it will pass. And I don't think we talked tonight more about sheltering in your car, but all that information is available in the Module 2 information. So if you have kids in school, or if you have grandkids, I realize right now all the kids are being taught by distance, but when they go back to school, the schools are maintained as a safe place to shelter, and you need to send your children to school. Send your children to school prepared. You will not be able to come and pick up the kids. They will only call for parents to come pick up the kids if there are hours, and I mean really hours. The fire is really distant. Otherwise, the kids will be held, and there will then be a reunification process. You want to make sure that your kids have a list of primary and alternative emergency contact numbers. And quite frankly, if it was my choice, my kids wouldn't go to school on a red flag day. But that's, I shouldn't be promoting that, but that's something that's a reality that I'm worried about. And certainly if there's a warning, the schools will be shut. They won't even have the kids come in. If you're unable to evacuate on your own for any reason, if you've recently broken your leg, if you have permanent disability, if you're pregnant, if you've got speech impairment or hearing impairment, any of those, you need to be really proactive. You and your friends need to make a plan. You need to know who's going to help you. You need to make sure that those who maybe don't speak English well have other people that are going to help them. You have to be prepared to take your durable medical goods, whether it's oxygen or whatever it is, and that sometimes is a real challenge because you need more things. But you need to be prepared, and you need to find backups to your backups to your backups, because you can't rely on the first responders. They're going to be overwhelmed with other duties. So if you have loved ones that aren't able to evacuate on their own, or just if you know a neighbor that needs some help, reach out and start making the plans now, because you need to depend on you and your community. If you think about how many people are in the first responder compared to how many people live in an area, there are not enough first responders to go around. We all need to help each other. So I know everyone wants to know, which way am I going to go? And my response back to you as soon as you say, which way am I going to go, is, well, where did the fire start? So in Sunol, we have planned that we know we will use. If you live up in Killcare Woods, there's only one way out. So one way out, one way in, and it's 4 miles long, and it's a slow road. And we know that as soon as the warning comes, they're going to start moving down. And in fact, they did get the evacuation order early so they could start moving down. Once they hit the bottom of the canyon, and for you guys, you're going to want to be moving off the hill. So head to your biggest roads. Even if they become parking lots and aren't moving very fast, they are your safest place to be, because there's not much around them that can burn. There's mainly structures or parking lots or wider paved roads. For the Sunol area, they're looking to take 680. In your case, it'll be 880. They're looking to take State Route 84. And I think your San Pablo, anyway, we'll help figure out where are the major roads. And all of them got this regional map, and it's like, pay attention to the big roads. Don't think you're gonna zigzag through your neighborhoods. That puts yourself more at risk. Go the way you normally go to where the larger shopping centers are, and think about going out. And then you won't know which way you're supposed to go, whether you're supposed to go down 80 or up across the river, until the fire actually starts and they can tell what's happening. You will hear some communities have zones, and you think, oh, well, we don't have a zone. It's like, no, the zones are really just to help the firefighter communicate to the police department what's the first neighborhoods that need to come out. If you don't have a zone, they're using the roads. They'll use Appian Way, they'll use San Pablo Boulevard. They'll look at the big roads and say, take this area out first. And your local fire department drives those roads all the time. And so they know, relative to a fire, which roads do we need to go? So that's why the CWS is so important to sign up for, because it can take smaller parts of the community and start sending those warnings out. But remember, if you're nervous, leave whenever you start getting nervous, just evacuate and think about, well, where would I go? Well, get off the hill, get down closer to the bay where you have a lot more choices. You want to keep as many options open as you're going all the time you're going. Don't go through the park. Don't go to the watershed. There's a lot more fuel back there and narrower roads. Though San Pablo Dam Road is pretty wide, but still, I'd go the other direction if it was me. Remember that information will come in your evacuation order. So don't panic that you don't know yet. And I'm sure you're still now thinking all these what ifs, and I don't have time to cover them in the presentation. If you want to ask questions about them, I'll do as many questions, but these questions are all answered in the modules about what if my road's blocked, or what if my neighborhood has only one way out, or why is it such a bad idea to use a fire road? We have a fire road right behind us. We want to evacuate through the park. It's like, are you kidding? The Sunol folks finally understood that they could do a 3-mile on a paved road, or they could do a 12-mile on an unpaved road through fuel that hasn't been grazed, and nobody's going to know they're back there. And everyone's come to agree that, yes, it makes more sense to only go through the park if I have a firefighter that's telling me we're going to lead this group through. Otherwise, you stay on the main roads. It's much safer when there's nothing around. You can see from this picture, all the fire is held back. It's pretty scary to drive through, but the big fire is not happening on the road, and it's not threatening. This stuff is not threatening the cars. They're just moving on through. We talk about if you're trapped and how to shelter in place and how to shelter in your car. Most important thing is protecting your airway and your eyes, and keeping you so you can keep driving, and understanding potentially what's in your way and what might you do beforehand. So this is the end of my formal presentation. I think I've gone a lot long, sorry. But we really want to ask if you're interested in working with us. And if you are, if you type your name and type yes and your name and your email in the chat, and then Soheila and I can can follow up. So I guess now it's time. You'll see my contact information and time for questions.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone is thankful for the information too. I'm going to
That was fabulous.
here.